Like a beacon, Nanaimo's oldest building stands watch over the harbor in this Vancouver Island community, as it has done since the Hudson's Bay Company first arrived here following the coal up the coast from Victoria in the early 1850s.
Bastion was built in 1853 by the Hudson's Bay Company. They came here, there was the discovery of coal back in 1849, I believe, and then so they moved their coal operations from south, from Victoria, and moved them here. So when they discovered that coal and HBC was going to set up here, they decided they needed some kind of a defensive, bastion in order to protect their workers. So the bastion was actually built in 1853 by a couple of French-Canadian axemen, and they built it with no nails. It was tongue and groove kind of system of building the bastion. And the interesting part about the history of it is that this is the third location that the bastion's been in. It's been moved twice. It was moved in 1891 when there was the sale of land in the downtown. So instead of tearing it down, because it would have been almost 40 years old at that point, but the community said, no, we want to keep this bastion. It's a symbol of our community, so they moved it. And they didn't move it far, they moved it across the street. And then in 1974, there was, again, some changes downtown, and it was moved to its final and permanent location, which is right behind me on Pioneer Plaza.
But time and the weather had taken its toll on Nanaimo's iconic building, and the city was in danger of losing the bastion altogether.
Well, after 157 years, it's succumbing to some wood rot on one side of the building, the one that's exposed to the elements, to the rain and the wind from the harbor. So there's wood rot going on, so it's leaning about 3 degrees, they're suggesting.
During its history, the bastion has served Nanaimo citizens in various ways.
The bastion was a trading post. It was an arsenal, it was a refuge, and at one time early on it was a jail.
With the chance of losing the bastion forever, the public was once again called upon to come to its rescue.
Well, it's absolutely essential that the bastion be retained. It's one of the last forts certainly in Canada, in Western Canada, and it's one of very, very few still existing original Hudson Bay forts. We're so proud of the bastion. It's been a part of Nanaimo's history almost since the very beginning of time, and if it's something that isn't looked after now, it'll be too late.
With a cost estimate of $300,000 to restore the building, the museum was looking for some private donators to help offset the cost to the city. The first such donation came from a company with a long history in Nanaimo.
With HBC, our heritage is very, very important in Canada. As being the oldest company in Canada, we've kind of gone back to our roots in the last year or so. Being involved with the Olympics kind of put the company back on the map as such. And for Nanaimo, the bastion is definitely a monument that we felt needed to be involved with as far as the restoration. When it came up, there was $200,000 needed for the restoration. HBC decided to step in and do a donation of $80,000.
Yeah, absolutely, same thing, Lee. This is an important part of Canada's history, as is HBC, and we're here celebrating the need and the importance to take this historical place and keep it going for generations to come. And we're proud to have part of the role of fundraising to support the restoration of the bastion. It is critical for the Canada's history and for HBC's pride as being part of that.
With large donations from local businessman Sidney Sherman and the Lions Club, enough funds had been raised to begin the restoration project. With funding now in place, the next challenge was to find the best way to go about restoring the building. The bastion, an 11-meter-high white tower, was originally built by two French-Canadian axemen, Léon Labine and Jean-Baptiste Fortier, using a tongue-and-groove method without nails.
Serving an historic building has got several unique challenges to it. It's not technically difficult or challenging work. The materials are usually pretty straightforward and basic. The biggest challenge is usually the attitude of the workforce that's coming to approach the building. You really can't be working in regular rush, just replace it. Something doesn't fit to throw it away and start all over again. you really got to get in your mind that the conservation of the building is what's important, and the original fabric of the building is what we're after to keep. And it's not only the material of the building, it's also what the building was used for and the lives that it's had. We're not discounting at all the previous repair work and the previous restoration work. We're celebrating that as well as the material that is original on the building. And so conveying that attitude with the workforce, getting the carpenters up on speed with those techniques, and you got to pay attention to each piece and each product that you find, evaluate it and document it before you do anything with it, and record its existing state. And then as we take it out or remove it, or we get counsel or advice from the owner on what they would like to do with it. So it's not a simple matter of just go build this thing that's in a drawing. There's a lot of evaluation and documentation.
With the Bastion now closed to the public, Randy and his staff will spend the next several months carefully disassembling the structure. Every piece, every item, every board carefully tagged, cataloged, and inspected.
What we've got here on the horses are the first two wall logs that came out of that side of the building, which is, what side is it? That would be wall number 5. We picked it just as random to see how the logs would come out, see what kind of challenges we had in our process, and evaluate what kind of tools we need and how much time it's going to take us to do each step. So these two came out of that wall, and now we know how we can do all of these walls up here, which is probably the next step we're going to get to tomorrow. Almost all of these wall logs, and I'll show you a couple that aren't, almost all of these wall logs were put into this building 157 years ago.
So they're original?
They're original wall logs, yep. All the posts and all the wall logs are original, except for a few right behind you. And this piece, when it was pulled out of the woods, I can tell by looking at it that it was split down the middle, so it's a free of heart piece of wood, and then it was hand hewn into a square piece. So the original log there was on the order of about 16 inches in diameter, 16 or 18. They didn't work with them bigger than they needed to, because then they had to axe off more and more wood. It was just hard work. So they picked a tree that was just the right size for what they wanted to do. And that tree, with this ring count, would have meant that that tree was, if I'm looking at that right, that tree was probably 250 or 300 years old when it was cut down in 1853 to make this building. So we can work our way back to figure out, kind of how old that tree is right now. And these three here are brand new pieces of wood that were probably put in 93. Was the last big restoration that they did here. And these are brand new sticks. They've got circle saw marks on them here, so we can see that they were made on a sawmill. And whoever did the restoration didn't take the effort or wasn't charged with making that surface look like the ancient surface. A lot of these wall logs are also cedar logs, and they've replaced these with a couple of fir logs. We're not exactly sure of the species of everything in the building. I know there's a little bit of fir, but there seems to be a lot of cedar going on. Yeah, the cedar one would have been plentiful. 2, it would have weathered very well and would have handled it pretty well. It's also really, really light to work with. It's not nearly as heavy as the other, and so it would have been easier to build up a building like this, even if they chose to make it a little thicker and stouter. This was a military building. The objective was to have walls that would withstand a shot, or withstand an onslaught of some kind. And so they had to be thick enough and beefy enough to do that military thing. The fir would have been a stronger wood, but you're exactly right. It would have weathered, it would have rotted, it would have gone away faster, would have required more repairs. So here, there's a post on either end of the wall. The post has this slot running down the whole length of it there. And at the top of the post is this little chunk that's been taken out. And that's the way that we load the wall. If I'm going to take this next log out, what we're going to do is pick it up. It's going to slide up in that slot until it gets to the top, and then I can pull it out of there and take it away. to build the wall back, it's just the opposite. I put that end into the slot, I introduce this one here, and I push it through this gap, get it back into the channel running down the post, and it slides down. And so they stack right up with the tenon of the wall log in that mortise of the post.
So from behind a green veil, the disassembly of the bastion begins, with careful details given to the exact location of every article that's removed from the building. This is a critical step when it comes time to reassembling the bastion later.
The braces, the angled braces on the side here that held up those boards. Each of those has got a lumber tag on it with some chalk marks also describing its orientation. There's a tag that you can see there. It's a numbered tag. Each piece of wood that comes out or is moved gets tagged, gets labeled, gets some comments put on our working drawings, and that way we know how it's all going back in. We took them out in a hurry a week ago, and today we've taken the step of pulling all the nails out of this stuff to put it into storage. Some of the nails are pretty interesting and old. These are great big and definitely hand cut, so they're pretty old. And then obviously these are relatively new. A galvanized nail and just a regular great big 16 penny or 16 nail there. So there's a whole series of age and historical restorations going on here, and we're trying to make sense of that as we go along. Now we're on the third floor of the bastion here. And what we've got here is a whole bunch of trims and grates and screens that were on a bunch of these portholes and cannon covers, if you will. Each of them was removed, was noted where it came from. We've attached all the hardware and the pieces that went with that particular screen. It's all been recorded, and it'll go back in its original place. So we're not mixing and matching parts and pieces at all. Some of the other doors that have come off, both the second and the third floor, are these larger doors, solid doors. And so these are the trim pieces from the outside, and the door itself. All the hardware gets bagged and then written and noted as to where it came from. And so as we put the doors back or we restore the door as a unit, we can make a decision on the hardware, whether it's appropriate, whether it's still useful. Even each of the trim pieces has got a tag on it telling us where it came from. And we're looking at all of this stuff as what is the history of this particular piece of wood, when was it put on. We're trying to make an estimate of that. We'll make an appropriate decision for its going back on the building. Our goal as conservators, one of them, is to treat the building appropriately and maintain as much of the original fabric as we possibly can. It's not always practical, and it's not always the goal of the client and the city and the park. This project's going very well, though, and according to speculation on, according to plan and specifications, is what I'm trying to say.
So how many pieces are you looking at?
What are we up to? We're probably at 300 individual tagged pieces so far, and we're probably going to triple that. So we're probably at 1,000, 1,200 pieces of individually tagged items and known places in the building.
During the next several weeks, construction crews will be removing the materials from the bastion, separating those that can be reused from those that must be repaired, until everything, including the roof and the floors, have been removed. With the bastion now disassembled, the new task at hand was restoring the damaged material. Measuring twice and cutting once, the damaged parts of the existing wood must first be removed before new wood can be adhered to the existing timbers. With the rotten wood replaced and an axe in his hand, the worker will use the same method as he did back in the 1850s of hewing the wood in order to match the surfaces. With all its pieces now repaired, like a giant jigsaw puzzle, it was time to put the bastion back together. Piece by piece, over the next few weeks, the bastion began to take on its familiar shape. As extensive as the work that has been done, Randy Churchill and his crew have been extremely careful to preserve and protect as much as the original structure as possible. With the placement of the last few floorboards, the filling in of the last few cracks in the walls, and a fresh coat of paint, the bastion is once again ready to serve the citizens of Nanaimo for another 157 years.